Welcome to the 4 different types of procrastinations that are ruining your life, specifically for founders and entrepreneurs. So, the table of contents that we're going to be going over today is split into 5 parts. So, the first 4 parts are going to be going over what these 4 different types of procrastination actually look like, the symptoms, some of the causes, some of the effects, and then step number 5 is going to be the most important because that's going to be giving you the specific 3-step action protocol that I have designed for everyone that is struggling with this. So, with the table of contents, first of all, there is the obvious form of procrastination. This is something like doom scrolling, going on social media, entertainment over substance is kind of the theme that you can put here to describe it. So, this is basically avoiding any kind of work and also making any kind of social connections with people. You can think about the old phrase, work hard, play hard. In this, you're not working hard and you're not even playing hard. It's just procrastinating on both. Number 2, this is procrastinating, stopping bad habits. Keeping on doing bad habits, even though you know that long term they're bad for you, under the justification that it will take too much time and effort to kick them. Short term gain and long term ruin. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. So that's what that phrase means here when it comes to this. So a lot of people, they'll say, oh, this bad habit is keeping me happy, or it's not that bad. It doesn't take that much time, or actually take more time to kick it. That's actually a form of procrastination, which is really quite insidious. And it's what some people get stuck in for years, which is why they can't quit a habit for years. And it just gets harder and harder and harder. Number 3, this is an important one. Doing the fun work over the important needle moving work. If you're a founder or an entrepreneur working in someone's business, then this is something that's definitely going to apply to a lot of people. It applies to a lot of the people that I worked with who are both founders and entrepreneurs, and even just self-employed people who have to make a living for themselves, like poker players, that kind of stuff. Whenever I work with them and there's an issue around self-sabotage, specifically in the form of procrastination, it's almost always to do with this. And we're going to be going into the framework of extroversion and introversion to define what that looks like for both, because it's different for both. And if you don't know that, then it can encourage blind spots. And if it encourages blind spots, then at some point that blind spot is going to get so big, it's almost like a black hole that sucks all your progress that you think you made in your business, and it just tears it apart from the inside. Then number 4 is something which is a little bit left field, but this is something which definitely applies to all of the past dozen or more clients that I worked with, which is using drugs and alcohol or party drugs to procrastinate developing true core confidence in yourself. So this is when you are going out after you've been working 10, 12, 14-hour days and you decide to have fun, instead of actually developing who you are as a person in a more sober state, or who you are as a person, just being confident in and of yourself, instead you have to use alcohol or party drugs in order to get that confidence up to where you want it to be, rather than actually spending the time and effort required to become that guy that you're just pretending to be. This is super, super common, something I see all of the time. And then number 5 is action protocols. This is the 3-step action guide that I put in my that I'll put in the conclusion of this, which will give you how to prioritize the biggest ROI actions that you need to take, and then the 3 steps in order to effectively combat the procrastination issue that you are facing. So, we'll start with obvious procrastination. Like I said before, this is less work and less real play. That's the funny part about this. Play is a super important part of your internal ecosystem, in your ecosystem just as a person, right? It's used in order to close loops properly and not have so many open loops or open tabs all of the time, which will impact your ability to work, because it just takes up so much RAM, takes up so much mental bandwidth within you to have so many open loops open, right? So how you can categorize play is this 5 motion framework, which originally comes from the really influential psychotherapist Kim Barter, and I've adapted it into my own work and my own coaching and mentorship, which is there's 5 different areas you can procrastinate in, basically. There's the area of autonomy. Do I feel like I even have the autonomy to do this? So for founders who haven't even founded their company or even started, or maybe there's a move that you have to make, which breaks a little bit from the past. If you have an issue with procrastination, with autonomy, what that means is that you don't even feel like you have the autonomy in order to make this decision, in order to found that company, in order to make that move, in order to ask for a raise, in order to do any of that kind of stuff, right? Second one is initiation. Somewhat similar to autonomy, but you feel like you do have the right, you do have the autonomy, you do have the wherewithal in order to ask for those things. But initiation is, can I actually initiate that? Am I actually worthy of initiating that? Am I actually able to? Do I have all of my I's dotted and my T's crossed? This can come in so many different forms. One of the biggest forms is making sure I've done enough research before I take action. Or there's the other side of that polarity, which is the person who just falls into action and then thinks about it later, which is, let me just do all this stuff without doing their homework on actually researching how to initiate this so that there's less friction starting something because you planned for all of the contingencies, basically. Number 3 is follow through. A big issue here. All of them are big issues, all in different ways. But follow through is when you procrastinate with actually, you've have the autonomy, you have the initiation, but when it comes to pushing through when things get hard, when there's a bad month, when there's a task which is especially boring that you have to get done, right? When it comes to that, are you able to not procrastinate in that way, right? This is just for you to have these systems in place. Number 4, which is completion. Am I actually able to complete a task? Or as soon as it comes to the last 5%, that's when I'm pulling out my phone. That's when I'm organizing parties when really I should be working, right? When I could just go to those parties after I finish this task. No, I've almost finished it. I don't want to complete it, right? That's completion. And number 5, this is where the play part comes into, is celebration. This stops us from continuously being on a hamster wheel and it all just blending into one. When I used to compete at World Championship level, European Championship level in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, this was one of my big issues. I could follow through, I had initiation, I had autonomy, I even had completion. What I didn't have was celebration. After every competition, the next day or the same day, I was back in the gym. No celebration. And it's not even the time that matters. If you have a busy schedule as a founder or someone who's working in a startup as an entrepreneur, you don't have much time, right? So time thing isn't really the problem. I didn't even really celebrate it. At the start of my career, I guess you could call it, I was good at celebrating it. I would go out and have a dessert. But after a while, I competed so much, I'd medaled so much, I'd lost so much, I'd won so much, that it just became numb to me. And there was no closing off of the arc of a competition, which just made it feel like I was on an endless hamster wheel, which led to more burnout and less interest in competing, which led to a dip in my performance, which will be the same for whatever you're going through as well. So instead of a real play substitute like celebration or any of these 4 stages that maybe you might be falling into, there is a substitute for real dopamine and relaxation as well. It feels very relaxing to be like scrolling on your phone, but it's not, because it's a very active part of your mind which is going through this. And the most basic and obvious form of procrastination that there is this, basically. Whenever you run into these like kind of 5 pillars of motion is what I call them, wherever you fall onto it, obvious procrastination is just not being able to do that. Not being able to have autonomy, not being able to have initiation, not being able to have follow through, not being able to complete something, and not being able to celebrate. The most obvious, everyone talks about it, super standard, okay? So some more examples. Avoiding work in any shape or form in these 5 pillars. It's when you make an internal or even an external commitment to somebody else to get a task done and then it doesn't get done. So pretty self-explanatory. So you can find yourself watching YouTube. You can even find yourself doing something useful like going to the gym, but you've already gone to the gym 3 or 4 times this week. You don't really need to go. There's this other important thing that you need to do. Because gym is more stimulating, that's something that you choose to procrastinate on. It can be researching endlessly, analysis paralysis is there for a reason, or doing some endless morning routine with the idea to get you productive, when the actual thing to do to get productive is to wake up, have a shower, have a coffee, and then get cracking, right? Now, Now we're starting to move on to the more specific cases that I don't see too many other people out there speaking about, categorizing it in this way. And this is going to start off with number 2, which is bad habit procrastination. Examples, we've already talked about this a bit. Doom scrolling. Staying in bed, like if you just woken up, staying in bed scrolling instead of getting up and getting your work started, right? Or using it before you go to sleep and not being able to sleep, and suddenly you're supposed to go to bed at 10 p.m., 11 p.m., and suddenly you're there scrolling at 1 a.m. thinking, how did this happen? So you go to do a task on your phone, get distracted on Instagram or TikTok, and suddenly 30 to 90 minutes of your most productive time of the day is gone. This sounds familiar. This is like a bad habit, right? How this differentiates from obvious procrastination is that this is something which you are consistently doing. It's a habitual behavior. It's something which you keep cycling back to, okay? Whereas an obvious procrastination is just you don't get the work done for whatever reason. And there's no like real pattern of how you're passing the time procrastination. Doom scrolling is when like your mode of operation is the doom scroll. That's how you procrastinate. I was recently just speaking to someone on a call, a person who wanted to do some work together. And he went through a period in his marketing agency where he would just do calls for his clients and then would just get in bed and scroll. And it was really masking a deeper issue of depression and feeling like he had all this pressure. He had a toxic person in his company, which he had to get rid of, which luckily he was able to get rid of. But that's what I mean by a habit. Like it's your default mode of operation more times than not. So some justifications to get you in the mindset, or maybe this is you, or what's going on is, this is just how I recharge. It will take conscious effort to stop doing this. And for a time period, I won't feel good and I also won't feel rested. I don't have the RAM to look into this further. I'll fix it once I do. Meanwhile, this is the habit that's taking RAM from your system, right? So how we procrastinate with bad habits is, first of all, we're fed so many introjects. We're fed so many beliefs and stories because it's good for, or it's just like been really popular in the cultural zeitgeist, which is it takes a lot of effort to break a habit. I'm not saying it doesn't, but we already have that idea predisposed in our mind. We already have it pre-framed in our mind, whether it will take a lot or not, right? So for instance, I worked with someone like a few months ago where one of the things that we worked on was he wanted to stop watching porn. He had all of these storylines around it taking a lot of time. I have it so hard to break and it's going to take so much effort. And then after one call, it's fixed. And effortlessly, it was gone. And we haven't spoken about it since. Or we spoke about it, actually, this was the first time, it took a bit of extra effort. And then the second time, which is the part that I'm referring to, we haven't spoken about it since, and it's been 3 months, right? It can take effort. Like in that first example, it did take him a bit of effort. But then once we got to the actual core wound, the core construct that was keeping this habit in place as an avoidance cycle, which is what we can call habits as an avoidance cycle. I talk about that in other videos. I can talk about it later today, but it's not too relevant for you now. All you need to know is that we can go into habits or behaviors as a way to avoid what's actually coming up in our reality, like being stressed at work, like not having intimacy, like not having the confidence to go and talk to somebody that we're interested in, all of those kind of things, right? Once we got to the core construct and healed that through shadow work and through the mentorship, that's when this thing became effortless, right? So the procrastination is, this will just take so long. It's better the devil you know than the devil you don't. I'll just keep doing this until I have the space to heal this or to work on this. Meanwhile, the fallacy here is the longer you spend in that habit, the stronger those hooks are that get into your mind. The stronger, the more reliant your dopamine is on that habit, and the harder it will be to break. It's always, always better to just work on it now. It's like the old phrase, you know? The best time to have planted a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is right now. Another common one, nicotine. I mean, I don't know what happened in the last 5 years, but snooze has become so big. I have a few Swedish friends, and they obviously, you know, as part of their culture, they knew about snooze like decades ago, and they gave it to me and my friend. Wasn't a fan because it was so strong. Everyone has that kind of experience at the beginning, but this has become so important. I mean, I guess you could call it important in the cultural zeitgeist. So many younger kind of founders and entrepreneurs I'm seeing and I'm working with are kind of on this. They're always popping Zyn, all that kind of stuff. Wake up, you put in snooze or smoke a cig to get the first high of the day, or a vape as well, right? Usually I'm seeing it more with snooze, to be honest, snooze and vapes. And it's a way to make yourself good. It anchors a good state. It's just something to do. It's something to get some kind of stimulation, right? However, like my Swedish friends who have quit snooze and don't smoke anymore, very quickly becomes a dependency. If you don't have it, then it can really dictate your mood. And the more external things that dictate your mood as a founder, as somebody who's starting their own business, or somebody who's working in a really fast-paced kind of startup environment where so many fires have to be put out at once and so many things have to be done. If you're relying on something external, short term, it's great because, oh, if I just take this one thing, boom, I can feel better. Nice. And that's 2 hours of work just gone like that, where I'm in flow. However, when it becomes a crutch, we want to minimize as many times having crutches, because as soon as crutches get kicked out, that's when we start to go into yellow zones, we start to go into red zones. And if we can actually fulfill that high in and of ourselves, right, by state cultivation, by doing the correct meditation techniques, then that's much, much stronger. So some justifications here. You know it's becoming a reliance addiction and it's not good for your long-term health to be reliant on an external substance, but to quit the juice isn't quite worth the squeeze. So it's similar kind of things, you know, it'll just be the same kind of justifications. All kind of justifications become quite similar, okay? So you procrastinate to break this habit. Meanwhile, the addiction just gets worse and worse. This is something where it becomes really clear with that. It's the same with doom scrolling, but with nicotine, because it's much more like a drug, it becomes harder to quit the more you do it, and more painful as well. Like my friends that are from Sweden, when they quit, it took them about 2 weeks to a month to get back to how they were feeling baseline, and then to actually start feeling good, right? So that's the kind of thing that you want to get through. There's a way to do that though without any willpower, or with much less willpower, and that's what we're going to be getting into later today. Third one, the third one of the Three Musketeers, porn. Okay, this is obviously a thing that a lot of young guys struggle with. I mean, to be honest, when I've spoken to some of my female friends and some women, it's not as uncommon as you would think in those circumstances as well. So don't have time to go and find wifey and intimacy, so you artificially create her or the feminine in your head through a screen. Even though by quitting sex, sexuality, beauty, and intimacy will become less exotic, alien, and fantasy for you, and therefore easier to get the real thing in real life. So what this basically means is, even though like this is a way to get some kind of intimacy or some kind of high, some kind of sexual gratification, but because it's done through a screen, because of the projections that come with it, because of the way in which you create intimacy with that, and it's just with a random kind of stranger that you don't know anything about them. If you quit that, the idea of sex, sexuality, intimacy, all that kind of stuff, sort of thing, automatically becomes less of a fantasy, because you're not fantasizing about it anymore. It's not a fantasy. It's not something that you just see through a screen. From my own journey of quitting porn, what actually became interesting is that beauty, sexuality, intimacy became much more natural and normal. It wasn't this big thing to go and talk to somebody that I was interested in, or to express that desire. It wasn't a big thing anymore. Whereas before it was a big deal, because it was something which, you know, you have all this dopamine and everything on porn is like hypersexualized and all that kind of stuff. And I was just working with, you know, an entrepreneur who was somewhat in that industry. She was saying to me that it was all, you know, just how fake all of it was. It's all there designed to hook your dopamine system and get gratification, you know, all designed for that. Like everything, every angle, everything down to the lens of the camera is designed to create that kind of, you know, almost like cocaine addiction part of your brain, to get that activated. So of course, in real life, it's going to make everything heightened and more unattainable. That's why it's so important to not procrastinate this and just quit it. Justifications again. I don't watch it too much. It's just to take the edge off. It's just harmless fun. It's just a way to de-stress. I can stop any time. That old classic, right? I can stop any time. Sometimes the justifications can even be, well, I'm dating. I'm able to date. This was my justification. I'm still able to date. I'm still able to go on dates and have relationships. So I'm not doing it out of scarcity because I can actually go out and create it in real life. What you're missing there is it's just another crutch. It's just another way that you're reliant on something else to make you feel better when you can just provide that for yourself. And when you can provide that for yourself, your vibe and your energy instantly changes. You become more grounded, more confident in yourself because you have less reliance externally. How do you think that's going to apply to business, to finding these connections in real life, and just to your personal life in general? You just become much, much more grounded, much, much more mature, right? Which is good for your business, it's good for your bottom line, it's good for your relationships. And meanwhile, it's destroying an intrinsic drive, excuse me. have a bit of a cold, which is why my nose keeps on getting blocked. So to continue, meanwhile, it's destroying an intrinsic drive to fix the intimacy issue you have for real. It's a band-aid on top of a massive flesh wound. It works maybe short term, but it doesn't go away and it just gets worse over time. The issue is not addressed, right? All of these bad habits, to go into more detail, are something called avoidance cycles. An avoidance cycle is something that's employed to get you back to what we can colloquially call your comfortable mode of operating, or your comfort zone, your emotional comfort zone. Let's say your emotional comfort zone is between feeling a 4 out of 10 and feeling a 7 out of 10, right? If you go too low, then that's when avoidance cycles are used to bring you back up to baseline, like a 4 out of 10 or a 5 out of 10. If you're going into a 3 out of 10 or 2 out of 10, these can be porn, doom scrolling, any kind of form of procrastination when it comes to that. And we employ these because they make us feel better. The problem with avoidance cycles, sometimes even the gym can be an avoidance cycle, by the way. Not saying the gym is bad or anything like that. It's just when it's used as a way to avoid maybe the stress you're feeling, maybe the emptiness you're feeling and not being able to find a partner, maybe the emptiness you're feeling at having to feeling like you have to market yourself all day rather than just being that guy that people naturally gravitate to and feel a magnetic gravitational pull towards, right? Can be so many different ways, and then you use this to avoid what's actually going on. Instead, what we want to be doing is actually employing something called a health cycle, which is we actually allow ourselves to feel bad for a little bit, because from that, we can really see what's actually coming up and then address what the pain is at the root cause so that we bounce back into a health cycle and we don't go into that dip anymore, because fundamentally our constructs, our ways of looking at this problem have completely changed. So an example of that would be I have a client that I'm still working with, and I worked with him a bit before. We worked on a bunch of problems before this, but he had an issue with always kind of chilling out, despite him being a founder in his own business, right? And that chilling out was really good. He's very mature, he's very developed, he's able to start working, getting more clients now. Before, he was in fintech, and he exited that and was able to live, without working for 3 years while trying to figure out what he wanted to build and what he wanted to work on, what kind of ideas he wanted to start. Eventually, he knew he wanted to start a business, and his avoidance cycle was actually to chill out a bit. Every time things got a little bit tough, or it was time to really go into that laser focus, like running workshops, getting clients, getting all that kind of good stuff, he would just chill out and maybe do some meditation. That's how meditation can be an avoidance cycle. Or he'd chill out and do shadow work as an advanced practitioner. This is an advanced practitioner. He's very mature. And he was using advanced, very mature avoidance cycles, so not doom scrolling and not using nicotine, anything like that. And what we were able to do is we're actually able to hold him on a session in feeling a little bit bad, feeling that stress that comes with being laser focused. And from that, something beautiful was able to emerge. A new construct, a way of looking at that was able to emerge. What actually happened is this boundary between this part of him that felt like it was laser focused and this part that felt like he needed to chill out. He looked at the boundary line, and that boundary line actually became a mirror. And he realized that they were one and the same things. There was a massive integration, and now he's able to be fully relaxed whilst being fully laser focused at the same time. That only happens when we allow ourselves to feel bad for a bit. That's how a health cycle comes out. That's what it means by not employing these avoidance cycles and by not procrastinating them, right? We don't want to procrastinate these issues of porn, doom scrolling, nicotine. I just chose the top 3, which I see affecting my clients, because when we heal them, it's not just the habit that gets healed. What gets healed is the fundamental personality structure behind it, which means there's a massive growth in all areas of life. And if that sounds really interesting to you, I have a 3-hour live stream originally done for my one-on-one clients on the most practical guide to do shadow work on the internet, where you can actually get to the core wound by yourself and heal it. Go and download it, sign up your email. It's completely free. It's the best resource I've ever seen on the internet so far for this kind of work. If you've never done shadow work before, don't worry. It has a 4-week guide on how to do 0 shadow work to get you to doing really, really deep shadow work sessions where you can get to the core wound and heal it. So please, if this sounds interesting, go and download that. Now, we're moving over to number 3, which is doing fun work over boring needle mover tasks. I mean, I've been definitely guilty of doing this in my journey. So it varies from person to person. Without actually knowing who's watching this and who you are, I'm going to have to be a bit general here, but we'll use one framework here, which will be really helpful, and how you can kind of categorize yourself, which is the extrovert and introvert framework. How I'm defining extroversion and introversion. An extrovert is somebody who recharges being around people and being in social interactions. Introverted person is somebody who recharges by themselves. Doesn't have to do with being shy, with being timid, or not being social. It doesn't have anything to do with that. It's just about how you recharge your energy. So extroverted fun work can be networking, jumping on non-essential calls. It can even be scheduling more essential calls than you need and meetings. It can be going on sales calls, brainstorming with colleagues and friends endlessly, speaking on camera, doing collabs with people, anything that has a social vibe to it, right? Even if your business is set up in such a way to speak to your strengths, there are always areas of business which you have to handle, which don't put you in your area of flow, so to speak. Like, one of the reasons why people who are getting into this kind of work who are usually quite adept and at using their mind and not getting pulled into blind spots, is that there's this idea of getting into flow state is like a high ROI thing to do, or it's a high value to have. And it's a bit of a misunderstanding of what flow state is. Sometimes you're going to have to do work where you don't get into a flow state. And how you build it into a flow state is by keep on showing up until it becomes part of your flow. Just show up, do the boring work until you find boring interesting. Sometimes that can be finding a flow state. There's ways that we can work with the unconscious and the conscious, and there's frameworks, don't worry, that we can make that more helpful. And I've definitely helped all of my clients do that so far. But sometimes you just have to accept that it's going to suck, right? And we need to disentangle the fact that, just because I'm not feeling flow, it must not be right for me. No, that's a form of procrastination. That's a form of self-sabotage. So what you can be avoiding in this work, the needle mover work here, would be actually researching the client avatar on your own without a discussion with other people, doing your homework, your R&D, your research to make your product better, to make your service better, so that you can actually deliver the results that you're promising people and that people are expecting. We'll talk about my client that had an ex-client that had a problem with that, and that was a real big pain point for him, or that was a real big issue for him. Then it's also planning content based on your research, editing, planning your back end, offer and ascension ladder, all of that kind of stuff, right? So over time, if you don't address this, and if you just keep procrastinating the boring, hard work, your weaknesses and your blind spots as a person and then as a business, which reflects you as a person, also get bigger as time progresses. And it means that problems can fester and grow in those blind spots over that longer period of time until they reach terminal velocity and it all comes crashing down. Like I said, happened to an ex-client of mine much earlier in his career, like a decade into his career. He was a total, baller, great at, really good at, a crazy talented at sales. was able to scale his marketing agency to I think about 20, 30K a month, was able to sell like crazy, but he had to employ somebody to do all of the back end delivery and looking after the clients because he was just the front guy selling everything. So he had to outsource it to someone else, and he completely outsourced it to somebody else because he found those tasks really boring. And what happens when you completely outsource that to somebody else is you lose control of your business. So this guy started asking for more of his kind of fair share, which, is up to you whether you think that is something that he deserved. Doesn't really matter. They had a massive falling out, a massive crash, because my client, we'll call him Joe, because Joe made the mistake early on to give all responsibility of that to the other person because he didn't want anything to do with it. He thought he was just delegating, but really he was actually putting his responsibility, putting his personal empowerment into the hands of somebody else, which leads to a very fickle and brittle business. And then his business basically almost totally collapsed. And now he's like making about 5K a month or something like that. Still, and it fueled a decade-long depression for him, and that's something that can happen. That's just something that can happen to people if this is something that you don't take seriously. It can be all good banter in the short term, and you can even be quite successful in the short term. But if you're in the game of business for this long, for life, which is what most of us are in, we have to be looking at always playing the long game without sacrificing the short game. But we have to always be looking at playing the long game, right? And it can be really cool to delegate. And I'm not saying delegation is bad, but if we're delegating with the flavor, or with really what we're doing is we're giving all of our power and responsibility to somebody else to handle because we don't want to look at it, that will become a problem. So examples of introverted fun work can be basically the same as but vice versa, what we just talked about. Can be crafting offers on yourself, researching and reading, R&D, endless theorizing and planning by yourself, setting up systems back-end, processing if you're into more spirituality, and shadow work and meditation, that kind of stuff. And then obviously the work that you're avoided, which will be the needle mover work in this case, will be actually setting up sales calls, actually showing up to them, appointment setting, essential meetings, outreach, going to networking events to learn more, to get clients, extra calls for real customer research, none of this theoretical stuff by yourself, putting yourself out there more is essentially how we can crystallize that. The result, like I said, is business, personal, and life blind spots in general deepen. They become more difficult to see, to uproot and heal, leading to longer plateaus, dips, and negative spirals. It's harder to dig yourself out from under the hole you dug yourself in. Can lead to short-term gains that will all be lost in the downswing. So you'll have short-term gains where you'll peak, and like I said with that example that I just explained, it's very hard to stop that downswing. And because all of those blind spots have been reinforced for maybe months, even years, it becomes much harder to adjust in the moment. Now, the last one is something which, the reason why I put it last is because the first three are the most pressing, but this is something which is going to affect people the deepest from all of the dozens and dozens of different clients I've had over the years, and hundreds of people that I've spoken to that have had these kind of problems, which is using drugs, party drugs usually, alcohol, or some kind of external stimulant or some kind of external thing, for lack of a better term, to procrastinate actually building real self-confidence and embodying and becoming that guy that a lot of people pretend to be. I just got off a call with not an entrepreneur or a founder, but someone that works in asset management and corporate finance, basically. And he didn't have a problem with drugs and alcohol, but basically we were kind of joking and talking about how everyone in that kind of world wants to be alpha, dog eat dog, and they all do it by pretending, by putting on like a facade, basically. You get a few people that are really like actually quite confident, and usually they're not acting like a super like stereotypical alpha guy. What you'll find with those people is that they're almost always super warm and super strong. So they're super warm and friendly, but they're very strong and assured of themselves. If you're a founder or someone who's working in a startup, you can actually get a lot of these cool kind of personality traits from those really chaotic and high pressured environments. After all, pressure creates diamonds, as the saying goes, but not always, right? Sometimes it's too much, like we learned with that example that I just talked about. And also, it's done in a different kind of way. Like you can be a real shark or a real killer in business and that kind of worldview, but business is just a sub game in the game of life, right? And it's the game of life that ultimately we're all playing. And whenever I've seen someone who's done quite well for themselves in business, a lot of the time they haven't had the time period or the role models to really be that guy, because it's so much about selling and making sure it's just a different skill set. I'll put it like that, right? So drugs and alcohol, I mean, if it's legal, like, and in moderation, then do whatever you want. I'm not telling you not to do what to do. But essentially the matrix here is it a net benefit or is it a net positive to your life, right? How do we evaluate that? Is the only way I can talk to a woman I'm attracted to with the assistance of alcohol or some kind of party drug? 90% of the time, maybe 10% of the time I can say hi. And in that 10% of the time I say hi, am I actually being myself, or do I feel like I have to pretend to be something else or somebody else? Do I really need this other person's validation? This is not a problem to procrastinate fixing, right? We can procrastinate to fix this because it's kind of more ethereal, it's less solid, it's more transient. Well, like, how do we really tackle that? Well, how you really tackle that is by getting to the deep root of where your insecurities are coming from and healing them, whilst also having the right conscious frameworks to relate and build intimacy and have connection with people in social and all types of romantic relationships from a healthy, mature place, right? But drugs and alcohol is a short-term fix or solution to a long-term problem. And over-reliance on these is a breeding ground for low self-esteem. Like one of the guys I just talked about had a really chronic low self-esteem despite running a successful marketing agency again, right? Low confidence and emptiness that takes decades to fix and overcome if you cross the threshold of no return. So to cross the threshold of no return is like there's really nothing. Like that's it, it's over. What I'm talking about here is more like you can cross a few different thresholds where it just becomes infinitely harder to overcome because you just have so much experience of when I take alcohol, I'm a charismatic dude. And when I don't, there's a stark difference. And there's just so many storylines, especially if you're just new to shadow work and meditation and this kind of unconscious reprogramming that we're doing here on this channel. If you're new to that, it's so easy to draw conclusions from that about meaning, about how you make sense of the world. So it's just so easy to create introjects, or introjects are essentially bad beliefs about what that means about you and how that means about you as a person. I recently just had somebody talk about how we uncovered a deep-seated belief that everything was supposed to be harder for him because this is just what he deserves because of how he treated people in the past. He didn't even treat anyone like that badly, but it's just how your mind makes sense of things doesn't always make sense, right? So this is the type of beliefs that it can be reinforcing if you procrastinate working on this. So if you've got your work, your business, your fitness, your meditation, your spirituality, your shadow work all dialed in, and you still haven't developed the confidence to actually go out and connect with the people you want to, like friends or love interests, and you have to rely on alcohol and drugs to do so, and you procrastinate on doing real, hard, boring, difficult work, of working on your insecurities, which is some of the most confronting work you can do, right? Working on your insecurities, to say that you're insecure, right? That is something which I would actually say out of all the 4 procrastinations is the biggest one. It's not necessarily if you just can't finish through on work and that's really, really hurting your bottom line instantly, or there's a habit which will just, if you just stop doing it, will instantly lift and improve your mood and take away so much RAM, or free up so much RAM space, right? Then I would encourage you to work on that first. But this right here is the big one. This is like the Mecca, the golden chalice, the fountain of youth, right? This is the big one, which will give you the biggest, most holistic boost to all of your personality. Because if you're able to do this, then your certainty on sales calls gets so much better. Your clarity, your execution, your vibe as a person. People just get sold on you just from being around you because you give off so many honest signals that you are that person that's been through a few ups and downs, let's say, a few hero's journeys, because just being around you and hanging around you, it's impossible to kind of front for that long unless you're a really good liar. People just get sold on you, right? I've had a few clients that reached out to me because of that, basically, because they saw that development, how I moved from someone who's quite agitated, unrelaxed, frantic, weirdly abrasive. I have a few people who knew me from back then, so they're probably laughing right now if they're listening along to that. I went from that to being much more confident, warm, assertive, direct, relaxed, grounded, right? That's a transformation which you can't fake. And in this world, the more you can show signs of that, the more you just have better authority. And also, to move back to this point, it just is a much more relaxed, aligned, and authentic way to live. Right? It's also much easier. Like you can just drop the mask and you can just be that person, right? So this, like I said, it bleeds over into business and networking events, team building and meetings. You can get overshadowed. If you don't have this, you can get overshadowed by more naturally confident and assertive people at business meetings, at networking events, all that kind of stuff, which is obviously hitting a bottom line on your business, but it also makes you develop storylines and feel bad and feel not good enough and have worthiness issues and all that stuff, when really you shouldn't be, because you're crushing it really compared to most people. And then it leads to less recognition and less respect in these circles. People feel like they can kind of bully you around, push you around. You just get taken less seriously, which is really, really bad, depending on all industries that you work in. But if you're working in more kind of professional corporate kind of style events, that kind of stuff really, really matters. Status. Like if you lose status, because people kind of feel like they can just push you around, which is what's going to happen with people who are naturally more assertive, and they get attracted to these kind of networking events because it rewards that type of player. You have to learn how to play that game as well, from a place of not using tactics and strategies, because that stuff is so fucking flimsy and brittle. It should just ooze from you from a person. That's why deeper work is needed here. That's why I recommend my free 3-hour live stream of the most practical guide to shadow work in the internet, because most of that is coming from insecurities, right? And if you can heal those insecurities, then you become a different person. So here's the action items and protocols to end with. First of all, organize. Organize which of the 4 I just described you fall into most, and even put percentages, right? And then what I'd also encourage you to do is write out all of the things you're doing in each of the 4 categories, so you have a really crystal clear bird's eye view of how you are as a person and your personality and how your consciousness is mapped there. Number 2, prioritize. Which type of procrastination habit would both have the most ROI if it was solved straight away, like if it had the most noticeable impact in your life, and also seems to be the easiest, simplest, and most straightforward to solve. I'll add a 4th there, which is the one which you're most motivated to go into, because the start motivation is going to matter a lot if this is something that's new to you, right? So you identify that. And then number 3, action. Work one at a time. Do not do more than one at a time. There's a lot of people that want to do like loads and they want to get after it. No, you just work with one at a time until it's finished, and then you move on to the next. Otherwise, you're just going to mess up your progress. Crossing each behavior and procrastination habit off one at a time. Only one at a time, like I said, not multiple. Multiple is only for the most advanced practitioners and people doing one-on-one work. So if you're doing one-on-one work with me, first of all, have a chat about it with me on the call to see if I think you're ready for that. If you're not doing work with me, that's not relevant for you. Just do one at a time. And the combination that I recommend you use is of the meditation TWIM to hold, and something called an unconditional loving witness on yourself, or unconditional positive regard, as it comes from Carl Rogers, the most influential therapist, in my opinion, in the entire world. Pioneered client-centered therapy, and it completely changed the therapy landscape for good in terms of the results that he was delivering. Essentially, what this meditation is something called a metta meditation. Metta is the Sanskrit word for loving kindness. We need to hold this for ourselves always, because this is the thing that stops negative spirals. A lot of the time when we start working on this stuff, it's a bit of a bumpy road, especially if you're not working with a one-on-one mentor, which is why I recommend you also find someone for that, because they can really hold you accountable, hold you in the space, and it just speeds things up so much. But you need metta in order to stop yourself from going into negative spirals if you kind of sense that you're not doing so well or you're holding yourself back. Because negative spirals happen when we do something bad and then we give ourselves a hard time for doing something bad. So, we're trying to quit smoking, for example, and then we smoke one time after a month of quitting, and then we say, you're a piece of shit, you're a pussy, you should have just pushed through it, like, I can't believe you did that, you've undone all this month of work. We want to hold ourselves accountable, but the way that's actually doing it is really, really harmful, because we're just applying more of a negative filter on ourselves, more of a negative spiral on ourselves. The more of a negative space that we're in, the more we're going to go back to old avoidance mechanisms to make us feel better about ourselves and to get ourselves out of the negative space, the more likely we are to continue doing that habit, rather than just saying, hey, I'm not a fan of it, but it's a blip in the road, let's get back to it. Unconditional love for myself, right? That's why that's so important. I have a ton of videos on that. If you have any questions on that, let me know. Also go into detail in it in the free shadow work guide as well, because it's super important for shadow work, and then shadow work for unconscious healing and rewiring. So we get to the root cause of what's actually causing this issue, and we're not just bantering around with the symptoms, with triggers, or even with how our mind is making sense of it. We want to get into how it started, where it started, when it started, what is sustaining this, and deconstruct all of that and heal it at the root cause. And that's what the shadow work product is for. Any questions, I have my email on the channel description and also the comments below. And I'll reach out to you when you sign up to the product, and we can go back and forth on the email there. Otherwise, leave a comment and I'm happy to help with your progress. I also have a link for one-on-one too. Enjoy.